The days after that rainy afternoon near Pike Place felt different for Ethan and Claire. There was a new tension between them, something delicate but powerful. Like the first thaw after a long winter, Ethan felt it every time he saw Claire. It was in the way his heart beat faster when she smiled, the way his thoughts drifted to her in moments of quiet. But underneath that growing warmth, he still carried a heavy shadow. The memory of Sophie. The woman he thought he'd spent his life with, the woman he had lost. Claire noticed the change in him, too. She saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes when they talked about the future, the moments when he seemed lost in thought. And she wondered, was she really ready to step into a life that had been so full of pain? One evening, they met again, at their usual coffee shop. The rain had stopped, and the streets outside glistened under the street lamps. The cafe was nearly empty, with just a few regulars scattered at tables. The soft hum of the jazz playlist filled the quiet spaces between their words. Ethan and Claire sat close, her shoulders almost touching. But neither of them dared to close the last gap. Claire looked down at her hands wrapped around her cup. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" Her voice was soft but honest. "Sophie." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked away for a moment. "I don't think it's something you can just stop thinking about," he said quietly. "She was a huge part of my life. It's like she's a chapter that's not quite finished." Claire nodded, understanding more than she said. "I get that. I've had chapters like that too. Some pages get stuck in your head no matter how hard you try to turn them." She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability there, bare and real. "But you're here, Ethan, with me. You said I'm more beautiful than your ex. What does that really mean?" Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her question. He wanted to be honest, but he also wanted to protect her from the complicated feelings inside him. He reached across the table, gently brushing a stray curl from Claire's face. "It means you're the person I want to see now. It's not because I'm trying to forget Sophie, but because I'm starting to believe that there's something new waiting for me, something better. With you." Claire's eyes softened. She reached out and took his hand in hers. It was a simple gesture, but carried so much meaning, why quiet promise that they were willing to try. Despite the ghosts of the past, just then, the barista called out that the cafe was closing. They stood, reluctant to leave the warmth of the small world they had created together. Outside, the air was cool, and the city lights blinked softly in the evening mist. Ethan and Claire walked slowly down the street, their steps in sync but their hearts still cautious. They stopped near a quiet park bench under a street lamp. And Ethan took a deep breath. "Claire, I want to be honest with you. I'm scared. Scared that I might still be holding on to something that isn't there anymore. Scared that I might hurt you because I'm not ready." Claire shook her head gently. "I'm scared too. Scared that I'll get hurt again. But sometimes you have to risk it to find something real." Ethan smiled, a little tired but hopeful. "Maybe we can take it slow. Learn each other's stories. Find the parts that make us feel alive again." Claire leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'd like that." For a moment, they stood there, two people who had known heartbreak but were beginning to believe in healing. But life rarely gives perfect moments for very long. As they continued walking, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his face tightening. It was a message from Sophie. Claire noticed immediately. "Is that her?" Ethan nodded, conflicted. "Yeah, she wants to talk. I don't know if I should." Claire's grip on his hand tightened. "Do you want to do—" Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of doubt. "I want to be honest with you, but I also don't want to open old wounds." Claire nodded slowly. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, the phone in his hand, feeling heavier than ever. He thought about Sophie, the years they had shared, the plans they had made, the way everything fell apart. And he thought about Claire, the warmth she brought, the hope she stirred, the possibility of something new. He realized that moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing what to hold on to now. The next day, Ethan called Claire and asked if they could meet. When she arrived, he looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "I talked to Sophie," he said quietly. "It was hard, but I told her I'm moving forward. Hey, that I want to see where this, whatever this is between us, can go." Claire smiled, relief and happiness mixing in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me." Ethan reached for her hand, and this time, there was no hesitation. They walked out into the sunlight. The city alive with possibility, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, for the first time in a long time they felt ready to walk it together. The days after Ethan's conversation with Sophie were filled with a quiet, calm sense of relief and cautious optimism that neither he nor Claire had expected to feel so soon. It was as if a heavy fog had lifted just enough for them to see a path forward. Even if the destination was still unknown, their connection had grown from the fragile beginnings of chance meetings and small talks into something deeper. Something neither of them wanted to rush, but both wanted to explore. One late afternoon, they found themselves back at Maple Brew, their usual sanctuary from the world outside. The shop buzzed softly with the sound of steaming milk, the murmur of quiet conversations, and the faint jazz playing in the background. Claire looked across the small table, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a mix of warmth and curiosity. "Do you remember the first day we sat here? You were sketching, and I was trying to hide from the rain." Ethan smiled, a soft laugh escaping him. "Yeah, I was a mess back then, lost in my own head." She reached out and touched his hand lightly. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I feel like I'm finding my way back. Not just from the past, but to something real." Claire's smile deepened, her heart beating a little faster. "Me too." The air between them was easy, filled with a quiet promise. Rather than grand declarations, they knew that healing wouldn't be instant, that scars didn't disappear overnight. But they were willing to walk the journey together. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Claire began to share more than just moments at the coffee shop. They explored the city together, walking through parks where autumn leaves crunched underfoot, visiting art galleries that inspired Ethan's creativity, and sharing quiet dinners where conversations flowed freely. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the Puget Sound, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, Ethan took Claire's hand in his and looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart skip. "Claire," he began, "I'm still learning what it means to love again. I'm still carrying pieces of my past, but with you, I feel like I can be better. I want to keep discovering the Susif. You're willing." Tears shimmered in Claire's eyes, not from sadness, but from the deep relief of being seen and accepted. "I want that too, Ethan. I don't have all the answers, but I want to find them with you." They leaned into each other, the world around them fading into a quiet embrace. But life, as it often does, reminded them that love wasn't always easy or simple. One day, Claire received news from her job at the hospital. A transfer opportunity to a quieter town, closer to her family but far from Seattle, was offered to her. It was a chance to recharge, to be near loved ones, but it also meant leaving behind the new life she was building with Ethan. She didn't know how to tell him when she finally did. They sat together in the coffee shop, the place where everything began. "I have to decide soon," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want you to know because this affects us." Ethan took a deep breath, fighting the surge of fear. "I don't want to lose you," he said honestly, "but I want what's best for you, too." They talked late into the night, weighing the possibilities, the hopes, and the fears. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other in the end. Claire accepted the transfer. It was a difficult choice, but she promised Ethan it wasn't goodbye, only a new chapter, before she left. They spent one last weekend together in the city, visiting their favorite spots, making memories to carry with them. On the morning of her departure, they stood outside the train station, the sky gray and heavy with rain, the same kind of rain that had first brought them together. Ethan looked into Claire's eyes, steady and full of love. "This isn't the end." Claire smiled through her tears. No, it's just the beginning. They embraced, holding on tightly as the train whistle blew, and as Claire's train pulled away, Ethan felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. Their story wasn't finished, it was only unfolding. Back at Maple Brew, Ethan returned to his sketchbook. This time, he didn't draw shadows or memories. Instead, he sketched a new future, one filled with possibility, healing, and the quiet, beautiful hope of love reborn. The rain fell in that gentle, familiar way Seattle is known for. Not a storm, not a drizzle, just a soft curtain of mist that made the world seem quieter, slower. People moved with umbrellas and warm scarves, stepping carefully over puddles, lost in their own lives. Inside a small, cozy coffee shop, tucked between an old bookstore and a flower stand. The air was thick with the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso and the faint scent of cinnamon from morning pastries. It was here, at Maple Brew, that Ethan Walker sat alone by the window, staring out at the world through glass, wet with raindrops. He wasn't watching anyone in particular, just the movement, the gray, the way the lights from passing cars blurred into color as they passed. His coffee sat untouched, slowly going cold. Ethan, 32, was a man who had spent the past few months floating through life like a ghost. A graphic designer by profession, he was the kind of person who usually found beauty in details, shadows, angles, light. But lately, he hadn't found much of anything. Since the breakup with Sophie, his fiancée, his best friend since. High school life had felt like an echo, familiar but distant, full of reminders he couldn't seem to escape. He hadn't planned on coming to the coffee shop that day, but home felt too quiet, too heavy. So he came here not to think, not even to feel better, but just to exist for a while in a place where people came and went without needing anything from him. His phone buzzed again on the table beside his sketchbook. He didn't need to look at the screen. He already knew the name, Sophie X. He'd seen it so many times. A message every few weeks, always polite, never warm, just enough to stir old feelings, never enough to bring real closure. He turned the phone face down. Outside, a man rushed by, holding a child's hand. A couple kissed under the awning across the street. Everyone seemed to have someone. Ethan let out a quiet sigh and leaned back in his chair. And then her voice, "Hey, sorry, is this seat taken?" It was gentle, polite, but confident. A kind of voice that made you look up without thinking. Ethan turned and saw her, Claire. She stood there in a rain-damp green coat, curls tumbling around her shoulders, cheeks pink from the cold. Her eyes, hazel and full of life, met his for just a moment longer than expected. "No, go ahead," he replied, moving his sketchbook out of the way. She smiled as she sat down across from him, cradling a chai latte in her hands like it was the only source of warmth she had left. She didn't explain why she'd chosen that seat. Maybe the shop was full. Maybe she didn't want to sit alone. Or maybe, though neither of them knew it yet, something was pulling them toward each other. Claire Bennett was 29, newly moved to Seattle from Vancouver, a nurse with long hours and tired eyes that still managed to sparkle when she laughed. She had been through her own version of heartbreak, a long-term relationship that ended quietly, painfully. The kind where you both know it's over, but still try to make it work until one day you just stop trying. She sipped her latte and glanced out the window. "This weather always feels like a movie scene," she said, mostly to herself. Ethan looked at her again, really looked this time. She was the kind of beautiful that didn't shout. It whispered through her calm voice, the way her fingers gently traced the rim of her cup, the way she seemed at ease even in silence. "Yeah," he said softly, "like something's about to happen, but you're not sure what." Claire turned to him with a curious smile. "Exactly." They didn't speak much after that. Just sat two strangers separated by a small round table, yet somehow sharing the same invisible weight. The cafe played soft jazz, and the world outside went on, unaware of the quiet connection forming inside that warm little shop. Ethan pulled his sketchbook back onto the table and began to draw. Nothing serious. Just loose lines and shapes, something to occupy his hands while his mind wandered. Claire glanced at his sketch, then back at him, but said nothing. Time passed. People came and went. The barista cleaned counters. Rain fell. And then a second glance. Their eyes met again. This time, something lingered. A pause. A feeling. Not love, not yet, but recognition. It's as if both of them saw something familiar in the other. Something broken, maybe. Or maybe something still healing. When Claire stood up to leave, she offered a soft, almost hesitant goodbye. Hope this sketch turns out nice. Ethan smiled. A real one this time. Thanks. Maybe I'll finish it next time. She walked out, into the rain, not looking back. And he sat there, heart a little warmer, coffee still untouched. That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the green coat and hazel eyes. He didn't even know her name. But for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely stuck in the past. For the first time, he wondered what might happen tomorrow. And not with dread, but with curiosity. He picked up his phone, stared at Sophie's last message again, and deleted it. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside Maple Brew, something had started. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently. Like the first note of a song you didn't know you needed to hear. And though neither of them knew it yet, that quiet afternoon would become the beginning of a story neither expected to write. It's turned into weeks, and slowly the quiet routine of the coffee shop became something more for Ethan and Claire. They found themselves arriving at Maple Brew at similar times, often without planning it. As if the universe was quietly nudging them together at first. Their conversations were brief, simple exchanges about the weather, the music playing, or the new pastries on the menu. But each word, each glance slowly chipped away at the walls they had built around themselves. The walls built from old pain, from disappointment, and from the fear of being hurt again. Ethan noticed how Claire always ordered the same chai latte. A little smile touching her lips when the barista called her name. She had a calm way about her that made him feel, for the first time in a long while, like he could breathe. Claire, on her part, observed Ethan's quiet intensity. She saw how his eyes softened when he talked about his work, how he sometimes looked away like he was chasing memories he didn't want to hold on to but couldn't let go of either. She wondered what stories were hidden behind his thoughtful gaze. One afternoon, the cafe was nearly empty. The rain had paused, leaving the streets shiny and wet, reflecting the soft glow of the city lights. Ethan and Claire sat across from each other, the space between them filled with unfinished sketches and warm cups. Claire broke the silence first, her voice gentle but curious. "Do you always look that sad when you're alone?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her eyes searching his face. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled, a little sad, a little knowing. "Only to someone who's felt it too." He chuckled softly, a sound that felt foreign but welcome in his own ears. "I guess I've been carrying a lot with me." Claire nodded, understanding more than he expected. Heartbreak doesn't disappear just because time passes. Sometimes it's quieter, but it's still there. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without the fog of his own past clouding his vision. There was a tenderness in her eyes, an honesty that made him want to reach out, to trust again. They spent that afternoon sharing pieces of themselves, not the whole story, but enough to begin trusting the other. Ethan spoke about his work, the small victories and the creative challenges that kept him going. Claire talked about the long hospital shifts, the exhaustion, and the hope she held on to. Despite everything, it was the kind of conversation that didn't solve anything but made the silence between them easier to bear. Over the next several days, their friendship quietly deepened. They'd meet at the coffee shop, sometimes accidentally, sometimes by choice. They'd sit in companionable silence or share stories about their lives, their fears, their small dreams. They didn't rush to fill every moment with words. Instead, they learned to appreciate the presence of another person without needing to say everything out loud. One rainy evening, after the cafe had closed, they found themselves lingering outside under the soft glow of a street lamp. The city was quieter now, the bustle of the day settling into calm. Claire looked at Ethan, her eyes reflecting the faint light. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but this feels like the first time in a long time I've wanted to open up to someone. Ethan smiled, a warmth spreading through him. Me too. They walked slowly down the street, the rain starting again, tiny droplets dotting their coats. They talked about their pasts, carefully, hesitantly, neither wanting to rush, but both wanting to be honest. Claire shared the story of her last relationship. How it ended with quiet acceptance rather than shouting matches or betrayal. Sometimes love just fades, she said softly. It's painful in its own way. Ethan nodded, told her about Sophie, about the years of knowing each other, the dreams they had, and the slow unraveling of those dreams. Thought she was the one, he admitted. I thought that was my forever. But life had other plans. Claire reached out, her hand brushing against his. Maybe it's not about the plans we make, but the people we meet along the way. Ethan looked at her hand, then up at her face. There was something honest in her words, something that made him believe again, even if just a little. As they stopped near Pike Place Market, a place filled with memories for many, but new to both of them, Ethan's eyes flickered to the crowd passing by.